Right. Hello. Good afternoon. Good evening. To our Eastern, Central African, and South African colleagues online. We are happy to have you join the session. It's a discussion that you'll find very useful and very interesting. And so we would ask of you to join the conversation, either in the chat or you keep your questions. When we are done, you ask them directly. And in case you feel we're talking too fast, just pause us. Let's speak to your satisfaction as far as this session is concerned. We are trying to look at what we as teachers or educators or those who are dealing with young people can do, because the saying goes, it takes a community to raise a child. And in this era of digitization, a lot is required of us, and a lot is required of children, and a lot is expected of us as community leaders, because I recall my days in the college when we were posted to the community for the first time. When issues of abuse happens, the teacher is the first point of call, because parents feel that they are not that equipped enough to handle cases of disciplining children. And then when it comes to the church, you go and they need somebody to read the Bible or the Quran, the teacher is called upon. So in effect, the teacher plays multiple roles. I wouldn't even call it a dual roles in the community. And it is the reason why we felt it's important for us to position ourselves in the role that we have been called into. And by so doing, will help the society at large. My name is Awo Aida Mamenya. I lead a team at Child.Online Africa. And on the call this afternoon is Frederick. I would let him introduce himself. And then after that, we will take up the discussion. Thank you. Over to you, Fred.
Thank you very much, Awo. I appreciate it. My name is Frederick Lane. I am an attorney and an author based in Brooklyn, New York. And I have been selected as a Fulbright specialist in the areas of computer technology and law. And I have been privileged to come over and work with Awo and Child.Online Africa on a variety of child safety and cybersecurity issues. I'm the author of 10 books. I'm going to put a couple of links in the chat in a few minutes, and then Awo will make them available for later on. But a good deal of my work involves traveling to school districts across the United States, Canada. I've also spoken in China and France and in England about educator misconduct issues, the challenges of teaching in a world with so much technology, cooperating with parents and other members of the school community to enhance child safety and so forth. So I very much look forward to the talk today and hope that we can have some good dialogue back and forth about some of the issues that you are facing.
All right, thank you, Fred. So I will just go straight to the issue. In the introduction, we did agree that teachers play a critical role in the society, and playing that role in addition to their called-in career requires a lot of skills and tactfulness. So help us understand, how can teachers position themselves in helping students navigate the digital space responsibly?
Well, nothing like starting with a big question, Awo, to get us underway. I think the first answer that I would offer to you, Awo, and I'm sure that this is what you intended with your introduction, is that teachers are already in that role right now. It is forced upon them because of the role that they have in society more broadly. And so the question then becomes, how can they do this most effectively? And that's going to be a combination of, I think, self-education. So trying to understand what technologies your students are using and use that to focus your research and your study into how these technologies work and what the risks are. But then also encouraging the school to do professional development in the sense of providing guidance to you about the technologies you should be aware of, perhaps setting up training sessions if that's a possibility. And then one of the things that I think is really useful is having the kids serve as educators themselves. Because the thing to realize is that children, of course, have way more time to deal with technology than any teacher I've ever met, because they just don't have a full-time job. They don't have dozens of students to monitor and grade papers for and all the rest of that. So from one perspective, children are always going to have an advantage in terms of their ability to use technology. But we can, I think, be pretty successful. Excuse me. If we give students the opportunity to show us what technology they like to use and help us understand how they use it. And in the experience I've had over the last 15 or 20 years, I've seen a lot of great success in giving children that opportunity because they find it very empowering. They love the idea of being teachers. It is something they know about, so they get to demonstrate expertise. And at the same time, whether you're a parent or whether you're a teacher, that lesson from the student is a great opportunity to help them appreciate the risks and some of the sort of bigger issues that they need to think about that they may be too young or inexperienced to appreciate. So I think those are the three things that really can help position teachers properly, Alo. This idea of, number one, trying to limit your research to what your students are actually using, working with the school to improve your knowledge and, of course, improve the knowledge of parents. And then thirdly, bringing children into the conversation to help you understand what they're doing and the kinds of things that you should be aware of.
Right. So in essence, we are naturally doubling for parents at the same time as our own selves educated, because some of these issues were things that you put out in the parent session as well in a different way based on, I believe it's the level of understanding that you're bringing to bear on that. So if teachers are to adopt those three steps, maybe interchangeably and all, could you help us with some of the practical steps that they could adopt in addition to making the children educators or empowering the children to lead? What are other things that we can do as educators to promote responsible use of the digital space in general?
Sure. The first challenge, of course, is getting everybody to agree on what responsible use is of the technology. And I think that that's really the place to begin, because if you don't have some basic level of agreement within the school community, and by that I mean administrators of your school, your fellow teachers, the parents, and even the children, in terms of how these devices should be used, then you'll spend too much time arguing about that instead of actually teaching responsible tech use. So, excuse me, if you get to a place where there's some agreement on the basic ethical and moral uses that you want children to observe, then the next step is to begin teaching those principles as soon as possible. Now, one of the things that's interesting, we went to one school where they don't want the devices in school at all. So that's one approach if you're basically stepping back from that discussion. But I think it's probably more realistic, particularly in the older grades, that kids are going to be bringing devices in to do schoolwork and do research and things like that. But there is an opportunity in the younger grades to focus on ethics and on morality and on good behavior as a person or as a student before they really start using devices a great deal. And the more of that you can do, the more those lessons will carry over into their older years. Now, for older students, the challenge is to figure out ways to incorporate consequences into the lesson plans, because a lot of the things with responsible use of technology really orients around what happens if you don't use it responsibly. What happens to someone if you're a bully online? What happens to the person on the other end of the device or the other end of the social media tweet if you're not being a good person, if you're trying to hurt someone? Or what are the consequences if you're hacking into something, if you're going after data that you don't have permission to get? Or what if you're running software that defrauds someone? So part of the responsible use is really wrapped up in basic civics, right? What is it to be a good citizen, a responsible citizen in your society or in your community? And technology, I think we tend to think of it as this separate entity. But I think very much like, honestly, a machete or an axe or a knife, software and digital devices are just tools that we use to accomplish different things. I was out taking a walk today and I stopped to get some coconut water from one of the street side vendors, and he's got a machete that he's using in ways I can't imagine to chop the coconut up and to decapitate it so I can drink the water. For him, that is a skilled tool. In my hands, it would be a disaster. So I think what we need to do is we need to appreciate that part of our job as parents, and I'm the father of 4 boys, so I've gone through this. Our responsibility as parents and as teachers is to help children appreciate how much these are tools at the end of the day, that these are things that can be used for good or for bad. And people who are ethical and are moral will make a choice to use them for good. And this is just part of the overall education process that we expect school to help us with. Now, it starts with the parents, of course, right? Because the parents are primarily responsible for the ethics and the morality and the values of their children. But there's absolutely a role for schools to ratify that and enhance it. So, that's what I would say to you, Awo, is that the practical step is to give children instruction as soon as possible on what being a citizen is, how to be a good person. But then as they get older, help children appreciate practical examples of what can go wrong. Because I think at their core, the vast majority of people want to be good people, but sometimes they don't understand the harm that they can inflict. And so the goal of education, in part, is to let kids know that.
Okay, there are a number of things coming to mind, but then I'll let this flow, and then we will be coming back to those ones. But then if I picked any key ones which are new, for me, it's about empathy. It's about building resilience of young people for them to act the way they ought to act. And also that reflects on the society at large. So now moving to our next one. The in thing now is AI, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and what have you. how can a teacher appropriately adopt the use of such should I say softwares or tools or devices or what have you, such in the classroom to aid learning, teaching and learning? And do you think it's really a necessity, or it's just an add-on to what we know already?
Well, I'm going to start with that question. I think my answer to that is it is an absolute necessity to have teachers incorporate what AI is and what its potential is, what chat's potential is, into their lesson plans. So it's going to take a little bit of work for people to understand the role it can play and how powerful it will be. You know, I think this is something that had occurred to me, and I've seen it popping up in a couple of other places, that AI, these chatbots that we're starting to see roll out right now, is really the software or the algorithm equivalent of the World Wide Web in the 1990s and the smartphone in the 2000s. It is that powerful in terms of its impact on the world. So we're in the, it feels like we're in the first few weeks of it. You know, these projects have actually been underway for a number of years. So we're just starting to see them roll out to the public now. But there is really no way to underestimate how much they are going to influence our world almost overnight. And so I think that, to answer your second question, it is critical for teachers to help children understand what's going on and what the good and the bad about it may be. The reality is that these technology tools, and they absolutely are tools. I mean, it's incredibly sophisticated software, but just like anything else, it only operates under human guidance so far. So we'll see what happens in a few years. But at least right now, it doesn't do anything until we ask it to do something. So then it comes back to, what is our motivation in asking a chatbot to write something for us? Are we trying to educate ourselves? Are we trying to speed up our work? There are lots of very simple emails or letters, for instance, that ChatGPT can write even more quickly than any of us could. And do we really need to be doing that, or is it okay if the software does that? So that's a legitimate question. Now, some people might say, well, you shouldn't have ChatGPT write an email letter for you until you've learned how to write one properly yourself. And I think that's a fair question. But on the other hand, I use spreadsheets all the time, and I put formulas into the spreadsheet that I couldn't easily calculate myself, but I'm getting the information I need because I tell it what I'm looking for. And ChatGPT is very much the same thing. Now, a lot of teachers express concern over this idea of using ChatGPT as a way of cheating. And so, you know, certainly there's a lot of concern that if I'm assigning my students an essay question and it's a take-home exam and they go home and they ask ChatGPT to write the essay, then what does the child learn? And I think one of the problems, or one of the things we're going to have to confront, is the fact that we need to learn to ask children different questions to test what they're learning. And increasingly, a little bit like when Wikipedia really started to take off, or Google, a lot of teachers were very upset about the idea that their students might simply Google answers or go to Wikipedia and copy down the answer. And of course, that's very easy to detect. But the successful teachers were ones who figured out ways that Google and Wikipedia couldn't answer the questions that they were asking. So the goal would be to come up with things that test the creativity and the critical thinking of students and get a sense of their accomplishments or their learning or their grasp of what's being taught through those kinds of assessments. And I think ChatGPT will just make that a little more difficult. That, part of what we're going to have to do now as educators is to come up with questions or come up with tests that ChatGPT can't answer because it's not that style of assessment. And I'm not a professional teacher, so I'm not in a position to tell you exactly what that is going to look like. But I would argue, just in very broad terms, that it's going to be asking students to demonstrate more critical thinking. The thing about something like ChatGPT that's important to remember is that at the end of the day, it's simply a predictive model for what the next word might be in a given situation. And it's all done with incredibly sophisticated algorithms, but it's not actually thinking, and it's not actually creatively writing new material. It's using mathematics in a very sophisticated way to emulate those behaviors. And there's an important gap there between what the software can do and what someone who's actually thinking can do. And so what we need to really push on is, how do we test how well our children are thinking and how well they're able to integrate knowledge into something that's useful or reflects the lesson plan that you may have. Obviously, this is going to be a very challenging adjustment for teachers to go through, because kids will use this in creative ways that we don't even know about yet. So we're going to have to work on that. And kids have always done that with software. It doesn't matter what it is. Their goal is to minimize work, right? Because they've got other things they want to do. So that's fine if they're actually learning what they need to learn. We don't necessarily make people write out their answers on a piece of slate with chalk anymore, because we've moved past that. We have laptops. That's fine. I remember my parents back in the late 70s, or actually I should say probably mid 70s, broke down at one point after protesting for months or years that they would never buy me a calculator because I wouldn't learn how to do math. Well, honestly, I didn't need to really remember how to multiply 3-digit numbers by 4-digit numbers. I mean, yes, I can do it, but why do it when a calculator can? I'm not going to be a mathematician, so if I were, maybe that would be different. But in terms of getting through the day, a calculator accomplishes what I need, which is the correct answer, vastly faster. And for our children who are now growing up, very quickly, we're going to be talking about the post-ChatGPT generation. And any of you who have kids in first grade, they are now part of the post-chatbot generation. They will grow up in a world where chatbots play a significant role in what they do. So what they will need to learn is what the appropriate role for that is and how to use that tool effectively. So the answer to your original question there, I think, Awal, is that it's not how can they be incorporated, it's that they will be incorporated inevitably. And then the question becomes, how can they be used to enhance the ability of children to analyze information, integrate it into a useful worldview, and produce something that is powerful and unique to themselves? That's the question. And then, honestly, already we've seen a new career emerge in the last 2 months. And the new career that has emerged is a chatbot prompt engineer. You can now get hired by companies to help them improve the prompts that they put into ChatGPT. It's an absolutely amazing. It's like watching dandelions come up in the spring. All these new careers are just popping up out of nowhere. And that's what this technology is going to do. We have no way to imagine right now how far this is going to go and how fast.
When you made mention of the fact that your parents were talking about something, it took my mind to the early years of one of the boys when his handwriting was so terrible. You could hardly read it. And when you give him the book that will aid his handwriting polished up, he tells you, oh, mommy, I'm going to be using computers. There's no need for me to learn handwriting. And he, he kept up
Sure.
to read. And
He's
today,
not wrong.
his handwriting has improved a little bit, but it's still sometimes difficult to read when he writes in haste. So
Yeah.
clearly, there has to be that balance. You need to learn a bit of this, and it's important, I agree, we test what the children have learned or what they've picked up before we kind of activate their learning on some of these platforms. And so that takes me to my next question to you. In all of this, you and I will agree that even us who are in the field are finding it difficult to keep up with the trends. How can a teacher be up to date when it comes to the use of these platforms vis-a-vis ensuring that the young people that he or she is engaging with are safe in their engagements?
Well, this is similar really to the first question that we were going through, I think. And, you know, it's sort of tempting to just throw up your hands, right, and give up at some point because there's so much going on. But obviously teachers can't do that. And I think that the only effective answer for this, Awo, is for teachers to prioritize. You can't understand or know about every technology trend that is taking place. I mean, honestly, this is the work that I do, and I can't keep up with every trend that is out there. It's just absolutely impossible. So, you know, what you end up doing, and this is certainly, I think, what both Awo and I do, is that we end up focusing our attention on the things that are most relevant to the work that we're doing. You know, so for teachers, I think, obviously, you know, being aware of the leading social media platforms that kids are using and what some of the risks are is important. So you've got, you know, things like TikTok and Instagram and Snapchat and so forth. And you do need to know what those are and what the potential risks are. ChatGPT, honestly, if we had held this back in September when we originally planned to do so, we wouldn't have any questions about ChatGPT because nobody really knew about it back then. You know, so just between September and, you know, March, the world has changed. So now, unfortunately, that needs to get bumped up to the top of your paying attention list. And I guess that's the way I would put it, is that, you know, every teacher, and I have a bunch of them in my family, every teacher needs to prioritize what they pay attention to. And, you know, obviously you've got your classwork and dealing with the students and your administration and your parents. Those are all high priorities in terms of your time. But then when, you know, for whatever time you have left, which I realize isn't much, because, you know, most of you, I assume, have families and other obligations like that. There are things you do need to be aware of. So we talked a little bit about social media. We talked a little bit about ChatGPT. Don't worry, like, for instance, you wouldn't need to worry about Bitcoin technology because that's not relevant to your students or to what you're teaching in school. But some of the video technology may be relevant. In addition to chatbots, now we've got software for producing images from textual prompts. So there's the potential of that. You have to understand that. There's some misuses of technology that could potentially be an issue. Just one small plug is that every week I send out a newsletter that talks about some of the issues that I think are useful for educators to pay attention to. And that's a good, quick way to see what's going on. So I'll put the link in the chat and give it to Awo as well. I think that it can be very overwhelming. And I think that one of the things that all of us grapple with respect to technology in modern society is that we just want to check out sometimes. It's too much. And I completely understand that. And I think that a way of coping with that is to talk to your students on a regular basis, find out from them what they are occupied with, what's important to them. And you'll hear it in the conversations in the classroom. Kids will ask you questions. Most kids are not asking questions about, MySpace or Facebook or something like that. There are technologies that definitely disappear as far as kids are concerned. But the real useful filter for you is paying attention to what the kids are worried about, because those are the things you should know about. And then, from a pedagogical or teaching perspective, something like ChatGPT is not only the flavor of the month, but it is something that's going to affect how you teach. And so that becomes something that's important at a couple of different levels. It's not just the way the kids are using it, but it's going to have an actual impact on your profession. And so to the extent that you can get your administrators to pay attention, or you've got networks of teachers, either in the school or outside the school, that you can reach out to and talk with, that's a really good way to go as well.
Thank you, Fred. So, in all of this, we're trying to see how teachers can keep up with the trend and all. But then there's also this mixing link between the skill set of the teacher in question and the caliber of students or the expectation from community or society at large. Why am I saying this? There are teachers, for instance, a mathematician who will not be so keen on what the new technological trend is, but then you are compelled to respond to issues related to that. So we all know that the skills, digital skills that we have is to help us make the most of technology. But clearly, until we overemphasize the responsible use, chances are that we're going to have people who are engaging and doing just the wrong things in the space. Now, as a mathematics teacher or as not a science teacher, no, science teacher is a bit cool, maybe a religious studies teacher or somebody in a different field altogether, how are we going to marry the use of the technology, the encouragement of young people to adopt responsible use of the space vis-a-vis relevant digital skills? Because at the end of the day, aside their behavioral engagements, the skill side is also there. And we need to emphasize it for them to be able to prove to us that they are able to use the space responsibly. And that will mean that the outcome of their engagement must show in whatever work or discipline they are in. How do we go about that without offending the children or offending parents in any way? Have I confused you?
No, you didn't confuse me, I'm just laughing because I think the chances of not offending every parent is ridiculously low.
Okay.
Somebody somewhere is going to be offended by something. We all know this. I mean, there's just a limit to how much you can satisfy everybody in terms of what you're doing. But that does draw a line underneath the importance of having these conversations in the school community as often as possible, so that if people do have objections, they can be raised in a way that they can be discussed amongst different people and see if you can come to agreement about what should be done. The challenge I think you're talking about is that there's sometimes a gap between the way in which kids want to use technology for their own purposes and what is useful or necessary in the curriculum or from the teacher's perspective. And, obviously, teachers are in charge of the classroom, and they're the ones who are responsible for guiding the students going forward and figuring out what information and what knowledge the students need in order to effectively learn the material. For hundreds of years, we did that without technology. So clearly there's a well-established pattern for teaching different subjects. The thing about technology, I think, more so in the liberal arts like literature and subjects like that, maybe art history or poetry or what have you, is that the technology is very much a tool for producing the content, whereas in the sciences you're using technology as part of your analysis, as part of your actual work in the subject. So there are different uses. And then beyond all of that, of course, the kids are coming up with their own creative uses of technology that may not have anything to do with what the curriculum says. So, this is an ongoing, what I would refer to almost as a dance between the teacher and the students in terms of how technology gets used. And it is ultimately within the bounds of the classroom. It's the responsibility of the teacher, with the help of the administrators, to set the rules about how the technology will be used. And that requires the administrators and educators to talk with each other and figure out what those rules should be. There's a need to adjust going forward on a fairly regular basis because we learn new things about how technology can be used. And ChatGPT is going to be a great example, right? Just in the first month that it rolled out, almost all the articles that I saved in my research database were about teachers panicking over the potential of cheating. That didn't, that hasn't gone away, but now the articles are shifting. Our focus now is, wait a minute. Yeah, that's probably the first use case the kids will think of, but what other ways can we use ChatGPT as a tool for educating children? Because clearly it's a very powerful tool. So that's now the focus that people are working on. And I think that that's really a very good lesson for technology as a whole. Very much like my parents, laughing at them about the calculator. It starts off seeming scary, like it's going to be a detriment to us as human beings. But then we figure out ways to adapt to the technology and make it useful, to enhance what we do. And ultimately, I hope that's what people will do with all of the technologies that are in the schools. When we talk about kids and how they use them, they're kind of chaotic. And that's the way I think of kids with technology. When they first get their hands on it, they want to try everything. They want to try and break it. They want to try to use it to break things. They want to use it in all kinds of different ways. And so much of parenting and teaching is channeling, is teaching children how to channel that energy into something productive. Because that's where the technology is at its most powerful, is if we can help kids channel it and use it in ways that are productive, we don't know as adults what they'll do with it. And that's amazing. That's just such an optimistic thing to think about.
Hello, Derek. Your hand was up. Would you like to ask your question? Or
It
make
has
your
been already covered.
Sorry?
It has been already covered, madam.
Oh, he's already covered it.
Yes.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Fred, walk us through. Cyberbullying, we all know it's not okay or it's not cool. But how can we use a cyberbullying incident in order to reinforce positive behaviors in young people, especially in a classroom setting? Your microphone, please. You're on mute.
My bad. It's a great question, Awo. Cyberbullying has been a huge problem in the United States, in schools across the country. And without question, schools really wrestle with how to respond to it. And there's, a bunch of different factors that come into play here. I mean, number one, does the school or do the teachers even know it's taking place? So that's the first question. And in many instances, something bad will happen to the students involved, and the school will not have had any knowledge of what's going on. Because remember that almost all of the cyberbullying is taking place on private social media networks. Now, it may be public, the comments may be publicly posted, but very few schools, if any, have the resources to monitor the social media of all of their students. And they probably shouldn't anyway, because that, even if it is public, it's kind of intrusive for a school to do that. So you don't necessarily want that to happen. If the school does know about it, because the cyberbullying causes disruption within the classroom, then at least under the laws of the United States, the expectation is that the school will do something about it, that they'll step in some way. And, the responses include obviously talking to the children who are involved. In some cases, there may be a punishment for the bully. Certainly getting the parents involved so that everybody understands what's going on and what the potential harms might be. In particularly severe cases, you might actually have law enforcement or the police coming in and talking to the people involved. In terms of making it a teachable moment, the goal ideally would be to have preempted a lot of that by teaching values and morals when the children are younger. Because even in elementary school, where relatively few children have a phone or a smartphone to use, we wouldn't be so naive as to say bullying doesn't occur. I mean, we know that kids bully each other and have since probably the dawn of time. But the point being that we can use those moments, those real world moments, as an opportunity to get kids to appreciate the consequences of what they do, the hurt that they cause when they do it. And the goal at the end of the day is to enhance their empathy, their understanding of the potential harm that they do. And one of the problems that we face with social media is that traditionally, or sort of at its core, empathy arises from our observation of the consequences of our action. So if as a 5-year-old, we push someone over on the playground and that person starts to cry, or they've got a bloody knee, or they hurt their arm, unless you're a real sociopath, you actually have some response to the pain that that person is feeling. But notice that that requires a face-to-face interaction. And the key problem with social media, of course, is it's not face-to-face. So kids can say things, and adults too, by the way. We have a huge problem with unempathetic adults. But adults and children can say things, and they don't see visually what they're doing to the person on the other end of that message. And so there's that, what I call empathy gap. And that's a huge problem. So absolutely, our top lesson, our top objective is to develop empathy in children when they're younger. And I will say, by the way, in the United States, that there's been more and more awareness of the fact that parental use of devices when children are young actually interferes with the development of the child's empathy, because they're not getting that facial interaction with their parents. Their parents are staring at a phone. The kids are trying to get their attention so that they can interact, and they don't get it. And so you are slowing down the development of empathy, even within 6 months to a year, which is just a terrible thing for society as a whole. That being said, when they go off to school and they're interacting with other human beings, hopefully there are moments when that sense of empathy can develop. If you have a bullying incident, the first thing is to try to get people to think about the consequences of the bullying on the victim, and not necessarily putting the victim on display. You can even depersonalize it and say, how would anyone feel if they got this message? Or alternatively, and I know some teachers and parents do this, you say to people, write an essay on how you would feel if someone said that to you. So that's one way to go about making it a teachable moment. And then another thing I think is to maybe put kids into small groups and do a form of communal justice, in the sense of saying, here's someone who was hurt by social media. What do you think the appropriate punishment should be? And you have to be careful about that, because if the names of the people involved are known, then that can kind of skew things a little bit. Maybe a better way to approach it is at the beginning of the school year, hopefully before any of this is started, set up those mini groups and have kids anticipate going forward. Like, if someone is bullied, what should we do? How should the class respond? How should you as a friend respond? Get them to really think through this particular activity and what the consequences are. And I think actually it's a great opportunity to get kids to open up a little bit about their online interactions. Obviously, don't ask directly, have you been bullied or have you bullied anyone? Because that's not a useful exercise. You'll get a wall of silence. But, another way around that is, do you know someone who's been bullied? And don't name names, don't put them on the spot, but in an abstract way, ask, how did that affect that person? What would you do about it? And there's a whole nother movement within the United States to promote this concept of upstanding. It's a play on the word bystander. So instead of just watching something happen, if you're an upstander, you're actually stepping in to help the person who's being bullied. And I think that's a great concept. And I would be curious to hear, because I don't know myself very much, whether there might be cultural traditions here in Ghana that you could tap into to assist with that from a communal perspective.
Yes, so there are some activities, traditional local activities, that is aimed at reinforcing such behaviors in young people. So it's built around teamwork and leadership. So for you to be able to collaborate effectively with someone in order to achieve a result means that you have what it takes to live communally with other people. And so when you see your friend or your other partner being abused, you can then say a word or two for the person. But it hasn't been fully integrated into the digital space. But when you think through it, because even some of our proverbs even talks about cybersecurity and all that. But until one sits down to internalize some of the the ideologies behind it, you will never be able to figure out why those idioms or proverbs are there and why they are used. So yes, that is it. There's a question. Yes, Grace, we will share the presentation. We'll share the link of the recording with you later. So I'm going to launch a poll. We have just one question there. We want to know where you are. And whilst we do that, I'll also be, Frederick, is it possible to post the link to the books in the chat as well? Yeah. So the poll is open now. Oh, right. Jay, kindly launch it from your end because I want to do some other things here. Thank you. Oh, okay. I hope the yes responses we are getting are for the digital space. We are not talking about the general teachers code of conduct. We're talking about the one specifically for online incidents. Is that what we're talking about? For those who responded yes, I need one of you to give us an answer. Hello? Those who responded, those who said they have the code of ethics, does it take into consideration the digital space, or is the normal, the regular teachers code of conduct that we have? I need someone to, oh, okay. Someone says it's just for the normal conduct. Oh, okay. Okay, I get it. So maybe my questioning was, my question wasn't that spot on. So Frederick, the indication I'm picking from the poll is that some schools have code of conduct, but it doesn't take into consideration the digital space. Would you say that as teachers of this age or the current dispensation, code of ethics or code of conduct will be a necessity for us, even should our unions or schools don't have it? Should we have one for ourselves?
Yes, you absolutely should. Let me start by saying that I've done some work on this because in the United States, there's an organization called the National Association of State Directors of Teacher Education and Certification, NASDTEC. And NASDAQ about 8 years ago drafted a model code of ethics for educators. It's actually in the back of Cyber Traps for Educators 2.0. And the point of the model code of ethics is to provide teachers with a series of ethical guidelines that they should think about in the practice of their profession. And
Fred, please hold your thoughts there. Let me bring in Derek. You have the microphone.
I just wanted to respond to your question. Yes, it's just the normal conduct, the way all the schools have.
Okay, so it's not a digital code of conduct or digital standards. Okay, Fred,
Yes.
please go on. Thank you.
sure, that sounds good. There's two things here. A code of ethics is more what we say aspirational. It's designed to be the highest guidelines of the profession. A code of conduct tends to be a list of things you should not do. So it tends to be a little bit more specific, a little bit more preventative. So a lot of schools have codes of conduct, but they don't necessarily have ethical codes, which is a slightly different thing. I would strongly urge all schools to have both an ethical code, a code of ethics, and a code of conduct. You know, and the code of conduct is really very much a list of what you should not do, whereas the code of ethics is more about how should you behave in general as a teacher in the school and in the school community. The question about whether or not you need a specific code of conduct or ethical code for the digital world has come up a fair amount. And I think that in general, the approach that schools I've worked with have taken is that you just have sections of a bigger ethical code or code of conduct that deal with the particular issues of digital devices. There is actually an ongoing debate as to whether or not the study of ethics is distinct from the study of cyber ethics. And I guess my response to that is that while there are some unique features to digital devices, technology is a subset of human activity. So if we look at ethics as being the guidelines for our behavior in general, then our behavior with digital devices or in the online world is a subset of that. Now, that being said, everything happens so much faster online. The potential harms are much greater. You can now actually hurt someone halfway around the world as opposed to, you know, just in your own neighborhood or community. So there are some unique aspects to it, but I do think that a well-written code of conduct or a code of ethics or both can address digital issues. You don't necessarily need a separate thing altogether.
Okay, so I'm assuming that in the design of such a standard, can we say that as educators, we can have a personal one if our schools don't have, so that becomes more like our guide? And why do you think we need a personal one?
Well, I honestly, well, I guess my answer to that is I wouldn't think that teachers need a personal one in particular. I think all of us as human beings need a code of conduct for how we behave. I mean, that is very much the point of religion, of community, of family. We tailor our behaviors to those groups that we belong to, because there are standards there that we are supposed to meet. And if we don't meet those standards, then we are punished in some way, whether, you know, we don't get invited to the family picnic, or, you know, there's some censure from the church or something like that. So I guess it hadn't really occurred to me. I guess I would expect that all of us have a personal code of conduct, even if we haven't necessarily articulated it very well. But I trust that most of us do. That being said, I think that there's some real value to studying or reading codes of conduct or ethical codes that deal with digital devices as a way of adding to our personal code of conduct. So, for instance, there are things that can pop up in terms of the use of devices that we might not realize. So for instance, thou shalt not trespass, right, is a fairly well-known standard for personal behavior. But do we think about it when we pick up somebody else's device that we're trespassing on their property? So it's useful to really go through and update these rules. As a matter of fact, one of the things I like to do in some of my presentations is to try to rewrite things for the modern era. So, the golden rule becomes post unto others as you would have them post unto you, or something like that. So you can take these principles of good behavior and, if you will, digitalize them so that they're relevant to the online world. But, and I say this all the time, it's not about the technology, it's about the behavior. It's about how we as individuals choose to use digital devices. And that is the fundamental message for your students. The technology doesn't make you bad. It may tempt you. There's all kinds of things in the world that tempt us. But at the last point, we're the ones who choose how to use that technology. So it's our moral code and it's our behavioral code that determines whether or not we've acted appropriately when we're using technology.
Right. So I was going to say that I think the only time I have been deliberate at setting myself more like a standard is when I want to connect to a particular platform. So I ask myself, what would kick me out of that platform, or what will freak me out for me to say, no, enough of this platform and things. So those have been things that I set out to keep for myself, and then for how to react to other people's nuances. But I never took it to mean that it is a critical code of conduct situation for me. Have we lost Fred? Jake? Have we lost Fred?
No, I'm here.
Oh, okay. Because your screen went off, I thought that you were lost. Okay, that's fine.
I dropped out for a second, but I'm back.
Okay, all right then. So I need you to share with us some successful models or examples in terms of programs that has helped in promoting responsible tech use, and some of the institutions that you've encountered in the States. Are there best practices that we can pick from there, and how do we know some of those? No.
Hello?
Hello, Fred. Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I have no idea why Zoom shut down again, but here I am. So your question was with respect to successful programs in the United States, and
Yes.
there, boy, there are a ton of different programs out there that are working on this idea of responsible tech use. I think that the one that I would put at the top of my list is Common Sense Media, which is a parental organization that is designed to educate people about technical issues and to give them that kind of guidance. I've got an actual presentation. I'd have to look it up, but I will be more than happy to provide the information to you. I want to pass on to others that lists several different programs that deal with these kinds of issues. People are coming at this from all different directions. Coming at it from the perspective of how do we help parents.
Frederick, we have you
Yes.
back. All right.
Yes, sir. I'm very sorry.
Yeah,
I don't know what's
so
going on. I've shut down a. Go ahead.
yeah, I don't know if it's a connection problem though. But then I wish we could just speed up and then we we break on that. But there's a question in the chat for you, which says, don't you think that since teachers are integrating technology into their lessons, they need class code of ethics for digital use in their classrooms?
Well, sure. I think that that is important.
Okay. Okay. So I want you to shed light on how teachers can support students who are struggling with addiction issues, not necessarily substance addiction, but this one, tech addiction. How can they support students who are struggling to get out of these forms of addiction? Is there a way teachers can support?
Well, I think the school we visited had a lot to do with that in terms of limiting their use of technology in the school. I think that's a huge piece of it right there. So that's number one. Number two, I think, is collaborating with parents to talk about what rules the parents have. And part in our class visit is listening to the kids and their input regarding how parents use devices, because that's a big part of this as well. What kind of role model are parents being, in terms of their child's use of technology? So there's that. Within the classroom, obviously, we get back to this idea of the consequences of digital technology. Again, you can have the kids role play this idea from the start of the school year, talking to each other about how much technology is too much. What happens if you get distracted, right? What are strategies that kids use? We had some input from the kids at the school, balancing work and their use of technology and so forth. So all of these different strategies can help. I think the real goal is precisely that, is helping kids develop an appropriate sense of balance so that they can make progress in their schoolwork and still enjoy this technology, which obviously is a lot of fun for them.
Can a teacher, or at what point would a teacher say that I have enough lessons, or I have empowered my students enough in the use of technology or in the responsible use of technology? At what point can a teacher say that? Is that a possibility?
No. And I don't mean to be facetious, but I think that this is, speaking as an adult, this is an ongoing life challenge, right? Because we always have new programs, we have new technology. It's all inherently distracting. I think that we hopefully develop good enough skills, the earlier start, the better. For a lot of adults, particularly of my age and only a little bit younger, this stuff has just been dumped on us as adults, and it's been quite a challenge to adapt to it. In that sense, kids have a huge grow up with this, and so they can learn, hopefully, more effectively to integrate it with their lives in a way that's productive. So if we can limit the amount of technology use the kids have as elementary school students, we delay it as long as possible. We give them an opportunity to learn about other aspects of their lives and then bring technology in.
Okay, I see you on, even though your video is off. So I'm going to go
It
on.
must be the connection here. I don't know what's going on.
Okay, that's fine. Once we can hear your voice, when it gets to that side, probably we may have to put the photo there or something. I want to know, from your experience, how do you think community support groups? So we have Parent Teachers Association, we have Caregivers Association on network, we have Grandparents Association and all of that, Sunday school, teachers, mosque, and what have you. All these settings, even sports organizations, have I will call them teachers, they have instructors and all that. In what ways do you think they can support the discussion around online safety or child safety online without victimizing or re-victimizing these young people, or without posing dangers to them? Because sometimes we take photos at such gatherings and without consent, we just splash them on social media just to show evidence for the work we're doing and all. In what way do you think these groups can support child safety, online safety discourse?
Well, you raise a couple of different points there, and I think that they're both excellent. The second one is I think particularly relevant because schools and organizations like the ones you're describing do have their own reasons for publicizing the activities. And so it is not uncommon for kids and to have things put online that they might have concerns about or their parents might have concerns about. In the United States, there's a federal law, the Child Online Privacy Protection Act, actually, as well as the Family Education Records Privacy Act, which those two laws are designed to limit what kind of information about children can be put online without consent. So any organization like a community sports club or after school or drama or the school itself has to get a permission slip from parents before posting any of that online. So that's an important thing, I think, to talk about, and to make sure that everybody is in agreement about what will be shown and where. So that's number one. I think the broader question that you're getting at is best answered by the phrase, a culture of cyber safety, which is to say that if we're really going to protect our children, help them become good, responsible users of technology, then all of the influencers, and I'm using this in the old-fashioned sense, all of the influencers in their lives, their parents, their school, their coaches, their faith, their activities, all of them should be committed to this idea of responsible use of technology and online safety. And so in an ideal world, to one degree or another, it should be incorporated into all of these activities and all of these interactions that children have with the community. Because in general, the community is committed to the physical safety of children, just as part of raising children. That's the idea, if it takes a village. I remember when I was a kid, if I was down the street and I started to chase a ball, a neighbor would tell me not to run into the street. Didn't matter, my parents were there right then and there. The neighbor cared enough about my safety to tell me to stop. So in a way, we need to extend that behavior to the online world. And obviously, neighbors and coaches and so forth are not sitting over a kid's shoulder when they're going online, but the underlying message of values and ethics can be part of all of these activities, and it will mean something coming from different voices, not just parents or teachers, but if it's also faith leaders, if it's coaches, if it's, you know, local police coming in to talk to school, all of these things help.
Right. So, Frederick, I have a follow-up question for you on that, because I'm looking at a situation where we want to allow devices into the classroom. You and I were in a school the last time. The school said it's a no. But I want to believe that there's going to be a time that we will definitely have to allow something like that. And again, there was an incident that I witnessed yesterday. A child was in a school. She had a laptop, and another student threw the laptop through the window, and then it crashed. It hit it on the floor.
Oh my gosh.
Yes.
Oh.
So this girl's parents drove to the school and were asking the school why that happened and what they can do, because clearly they as parents are thinking they have enrolled their child in a school that is safe enough. But from what they've witnessed, it doesn't look like it's a safe space. So they want a refund for the device. And the school outright said, no, we cannot give you, because we don't know which student threw the laptop over the window, and it's not in our place to replace damaged item. What should the parents do under such circumstance?
Wow. Well, yeah, I mean, the first question, of course, is which child was responsible. And you would expect that the school would help the parents of the girl with the laptop to figure that out.
Exactly.
In the United States, under our legal system, it would be the parents of the person who threw the laptop who should reimburse for the cost of the laptop, not the school. The school would only be responsible if let's try this again. The school would only be responsible if the school was negligent in some way and failed to protect the property of the child. But yeah, there's not much that the parents can do except if they're unhappy with the school and the administration to perhaps find a different school.
So back to the initial one, what level of permissiveness will be too much for allowing devices? I know in UK they have some customized devices which are allowed into schools. So by implications, there are anti-spam platforms which are already activated on those devices, and they are meant for studies. So the students are able to use it and all that. I don't know if there's a similar thing in the States, and if there are, what are some of the things they took into consideration in coming up with some of those? This is just a question that came to mind listening to the
Sure.
submission of yours. Yeah.
Well, and it's an interesting dilemma because in the schools that I've been in the United States, the policies go from 0 usage to 100% usage. So there's no consistency. And it really just comes down to what each individual school thinks is the best approach for itself and its students. I think in general, more schools are moving away from devices in the classroom, mostly because they're so distracting.
Right. Right. So in that case, it'll be on case-by-case basis or school-by-school basis, and at least basic research is required in order for one to come up with what will be the best approach or model to adopt.
Right, and I will say that.
Yes, carry on. You're on mute. Frederick, you are muted.
I am. I should. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay. So the only thing I was going to say is that a lot of times in my experience, schools are not using research or data to make their decision. They're simply going on anecdote or gut feeling as to what the best approach is, or they're getting pushed by parents to move in one direction or another.
So Grace wants to know, I think this question is for all of us to think about and probably come up with recommendations or suggestions. She says, how are the children in the rural areas going to benefit from this technology integration? Because there are schools in the rural areas that do not, some of them do not even have electricity, and some of them do not have devices itself. So access, costs, and all those other divides are there. How would they be up to speed? Because at the end of the day, they are writing the same national exams.
Well, this is where government leadership is.
So I'll be coming in whilst Frederick gets back. So Grace, what I will recommend will be for us to leverage on some of the low cost devices and okay, Frederick, over to you.
Let me try that. I apologize, I've had this happen. In any case, this is where government leadership is essential, because you're not going to get those resources out to the rural areas without that kind of leadership investment. It really should be a public service. And I actually believe that internet access should be electricity, water. It's a public service that should be made available to everybody. And the key thing is that, you know, there are huge challenges faced by so the one kids anywhere have access to the internet, they come closer to being on a more level footing with kids in other parts of the country that are more developed. The internet has the potential to be a great leveler in terms of educational opportunity and access to information. But they need obviously to get access to the internet to begin with. And I both, it doesn't matter what country you're in, every government should be working to make the internet available to everybody in the country.
So finally, my last question for you is, what do you consider to be an ideal school environment in a technology or tech adaptive era? We're talking about responsible use and all of that. But what will be your expectation? What is an ideal school environment in this dispensation?
I think the key word for me, Awo, that I would love to conclude this chat with is the idea of balance. That technology is not dominant in terms of its role in the school, but it's not absent either. That technology augments the educational purposes of the school and is used responsibly by students as a tool for enhancing what they are trying to learn and what they're trying to do. And if we could find that balance, I think we would be in great shape. The problem is that people sometimes overreact in both directions. Some schools want to make technology part of everything, and other schools don't want it to touch anything. And I believe in moderation, and I believe it should be in the middle somewhere. And that just requires the adults in the school and in the community to be thoughtful about how this will be integrated in their child's lives. And that goes for parents too, right? I mean, we don't want to just dump technology on our children. We want to teach them balance so that they're not absorbed by it and they don't get addicted to its less virtuous aspects.
All right. Thank you so much, Fred. Any question?
You're most welcome. My apologies.
Lydia sent in a submission. I think deliberate action needs to be taken where teachers are given laptops they use to teach such students. So yes, teachers need the tools, teachers need data, teachers need the skills as well, because those three have been the issue: the skills gap, the access gap, and then the cost. So, right.
All true.
Yes.
Yes. And actually this, requires at all levels and on an ongoing basis, an assessment of how we're spending money in our society. We should be devoting the resources to provide teachers with the tools to make this process better, because that ultimately benefits the society as a whole. which is what our goal ultimately should be. I feel very strongly about this. As I said, I've got teachers in my family. I believe in a more equitable and just society. And I think that unfortunately right now, technology is moving in the wrong direction in terms of equity. We need to hopefully use the schools and our children's education to address that.
But you know, I get sometimes overwhelmed to think that, okay, at what point are we going to attain equity? When I think about metaverse now and all the tools that are required in order to connect on the metaverse and be effective. So I don't know, but I don't have to have too high expectations. Whereby if it doesn't happen, I'll be disappointed. So I would stay, I will adopt your strategy, moderation. I'll stay in between. If it happens somehow,
well done,
I
Awo.
will be disappointed, and then that will be it. So at this juncture, I have exhausted my questions for Frederick. I don't know if anyone has a question. If you have a comment, a submission, or a contribution, you could put up your hand, and then, or you take over the microphone, and then we listen to you. So who do I have reposted your comments from my messenger to the chat so that everybody reads it. Hudu is saying that in Tanzania, the government has provided public schools with iPads, which they use to connect. So that's interesting to know. And we'll look into that to see if there are some lessons for other countries to pick. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent idea. I know that there are schools that have done that. For instance, I've worked with some schools in Alaska that have done an iPad initiative. And the real challenge is keeping the kids from accessing materials on the iPads that they should not access. So it's great to give the iPads to children, but then there's an ongoing cost in terms of technical support to make sure that they're being used properly, that they don't get damaged and so forth.
Right. Thank
so
you.
It's not enough to just drop a bunch of boxes off in a classroom. That's great. Assets are important, but everybody needs to understand that the level of investment goes beyond just buying the equipment.
So I don't have any hand up and I haven't seen any question. Okay, Bright.
Yeah, thank you very much, Madam Awo, for this great discussion. I just want to make a submission concerning the code of ethics that Frederick talked about. I posed a question earlier to say that yeah, don't we need a code of conduct as far as technology integration is concerned? You know, something just blew my mind. Once there was a program that we were undertaking, and then we're understudying. It was a project that was given, so we were supposed to understudy a particular education system. And then what we did was to understudy Singapore. I was amazed that they integrated technology into the classroom. However, teachers were so instrumental in terms of those technology usage. So even there was at a point, they have delegations from Australia who went there to understudy the education system. And then what blew our mind as far as our discussions were concerned was what a principal from Australia also raised. That was when anytime that the teacher is teaching and then he posed a question that demands the use of the iPads or other devices or a particular software, these children, class 4, that's grade 4, they will use those things within that specific time. And then the moment the teacher is teaching, they would have to just turn their screens towards the teacher. And that one, nobody is controlling them. So when they were asked further, it was as if it was something that was a school-wide code, a school-wide thing that has been carried out. And then every teacher has a way of making sure that that particular ethic is instilled or is ensured or implemented in their classroom. So for me, I think that since we are saying that we should integrate technology in the classrooms, then it's very important for teachers to also raise either rules and procedures. It should be integrated into our rules and procedures, how these technological devices and then the internet is used. And I think that if we do that, students are going to carry that into their homes, because it's something that will form part of their studies or part of the characteristics that they take from school. Thank you.
All right.
I think that's very accurate. Yeah.
Fred.
I just wanted to say I think that's really good observation, and it helps to underscore the way in which schools can supplement the work that parents do. If you've got clear standards in both places, hopefully they feed off each other and augment each to make the kid, put the kid in a better place. It's very good.
Yeah, and I think that's a good intervention, and I think it was the reason why OECD promoted the digital intelligence standards for schools, just to make sure that online safety is becoming or has become a lifestyle for the young people before they attain higher grades. So the program was for 8-year-olds to 12-year-olds, because that is when they feel that they are inquisitive enough and they are ready to learn skills and be cooperative with the adults in managing. So thank you, Bright. Princess says, technology has come to stay. The earlier we put the children through, the better. Schools and parents should help the kids to grow with it. All right. It's the reason why we're having this conversation, because we want to position ourselves as educators, and again, we cross in our roles as parents as well, in ensuring that the young people are doing what is right. And of course, you and I know very well that in Africa, it's not every parent who is literate, and some of them even fear the devices. So how do we help them in order to overcome their phobias in ensuring that the children have what they need and what they want? So clearly, this is a step in the right direction. And thank you for this intervention. I don't know if anyone else wants to take the floor. Yes, Fred.
If you don't mind, I'd just a quick response, because I think that it seems to me that we could have a really good discussion about when the appropriate time is to start integrating or introducing technology to children. And I think that, just my personal opinion, based on the work I've done, is that the longer we can wait, the better off we are, because we have a chance to really get at the concept of balance with children, their morals, their ethical choices. In my experience, kids pick up technology incredibly quickly. So even if kids are waiting until they're 6, 7, 8 years old to really start using technology, which I think is not a bad thing, they won't really be behind their peers in terms of the technology. And in part, that's because, the technology will have changed so much just in 5 years that who knows exactly what the kids will be doing anyway. So I really do feel like the speed with which some kids get access to technology creates its own problems. Even now, in the United States, the average first use of an iPad or a smartphone or something like that is 10 months old. Basically, the minute a child is old enough to actually hold the device, some parents are giving them access to it. And I generally think that's just not a good idea, that it interferes too much with normal development. I completely believe that if we wait till the end of elementary school or middle school, which for us is 11 or 12 years old, that is more than enough time for kids to really start using technology. And they will have experiences and they will have types of development that kids who start with technology earlier just won't have. So take this message for what it's worth, that when you look at the biographies of most of the technology leaders in Silicon Valley, they really delay their own children's use of technology. So clearly they know something or think they know something that their marketing department doesn't want the rest of us to know. So
that's the marketing module versus well-being, right?
And that's me being that's my cynical statement for the day.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. But the fact is that if really our policymakers are listening, I don't think they would have been approving websites for 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds as we see nowadays. There are websites for content designed for 3-year-olds and all of that. They are not listening. It's more like somebody coming up with something and calling it a novelty,
but it's the thing,
it.
Right. I mean, pardon me, Awo, but to be fair, it's not even the policy leaders, it's the corporations who want parents to buy this for children, in large part because they're scaring parents that their children will be left behind. And that's a product of capitalism. That is these businesses selling something that they are using to make parents feel guilty, when parents shouldn't feel guilty.
Then I wish every parent could be assertive like you and I in order to overcome some of those things. But unfortunately, majority is dancing to the tune. Okay, Richmond says, by observation, many children exposed too early stand the risk of lack of concentration and personal creativity.
Yes, to both.
Yeah. Okay. Any other contribution? Okay. So Frederick, you have the last words. And then...
Well, that's very for starters, Awo, thank you again for setting this up and for giving me an opportunity to meet with people across Africa, which is a real honor for me. I really, really deeply appreciate the work that teachers do and the challenges that teachers face these days. And I certainly hope that some of this will be helpful. If anyone has any follow-up questions, you can reach me at fredricklane.com or through Awo. And I'm more than happy to help out with whatever resources I can and to answer follow-up questions. So thank you all.
Right. Thank you too. And we are pleased to have you around. And there's a tool we are working on. We've been discussing it, but then when the time comes, we'll share with some of you for your input before we finalize it. Okay, Lydia says, I would like to suggest that a Zoom session will be done for parents, so you educate them on how to balance this. Okay, you know, interestingly, we had a Zoom session for parents last Sunday, but I think a lot of them couldn't join. It's just like today's session where we have over 100 people registering, but we have few people connecting. So We will see how we will make some of those recordings available. We want to make them into short sound bites so that those who might not stay for 1 hour watching one thing will just toggle between what they feel is good for them, and then we'll listen to it. And I think same will be done to this one. So please be on the lookout for it. And thank you for making time to be with us today. And I hope that when the time comes for the draft document to be discussed, we will still get your inputs for that. So on this note, we would like to bring the meeting to